Hey there everyone, I'm meteorologist Jillian Johnson. Welcome to Weather Extra. A major fall storm swept across the country last week. A nearly 1,500-mile-long cold front traveled border to border, finally bringing millions of Americans a true taste of fall, but also brought a round of severe storms. Heavy rain, strong damaging wind gusts, and large hail were reported across Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas as the front rolled through. The state of Texas got hit hard with severe weather Wednesday afternoon and night. Many Texans had to start their Thursday cleaning up behind those storms. Large hail battered parts of the Metroplex. Take a look at some of the hail damage to a local car dealership in Fort Worth. Hail was reportedly up to the size of ping pong balls at this time, which shattered windshields and left dents on many cars. Strong winds also accompanied these storms. Check out this video from the Toyota Stadium in Frisco, where 70 to 80-mile-an-hour wind gusts were reported. 2 fans were injured at the Dallas FC game. Here in Central Texas, we missed out on the severe weather, thankfully, but we're blessed with another round of beneficial rainfall. Totals range from around an inch to 2.5 inches. Here's a look at some of Central Texas's rainfall winners from Wednesday night's round of rain. Just as you saw, that cold front brought a major weather change across the nation. And that change for us in Central Texas was not only the much needed rain, but the cooler, crisp fall air. We finally had temperatures that were much cooler than normal, in the 50s during the morning and 70s in the afternoon. The last time we were that cool was 5 to 6 months ago, back in early May and late April. Now again, Central Texas wasn't the only place that felt the cool down behind the front. Much of the nation got a true taste of fall over the weekend. Many areas across the northern half of the U.S. have already been a lot cooler than the Lone Star State so far this fall. And that cooler weather has started changing leaves colors across the country. Take a look. Vivid autumn colors dotted the mountains of northern Maine this past Tuesday. The state of Maine neared peak foliage colors for the season. This drone footage captures the true beauty of those fall colors. Take a look at how bright those trees are that are covered in red and orange leaves. Maine experiences its peak foliage color right now in early October, and approximately 10 million people travel to New England to enjoy the vibrant displays across the Northeast around this time of year. The state of New York is also undergoing their peak. Fall colors fill the Adirondack Mountains in New York. This is the view from the Rocky Peak Ridge, where the colors of autumn have taken over the mountains. The state of Michigan is also enjoying their peak colors this time of the year. Red and orange leaves covered the trees along the Sugarloaf Mountain Range in Marquette, Michigan. This footage on your screen now captures the beautiful fall colors that are visible across lookout spots on the mountain. And the cooler air has traveled further southwest, and the state of Utah has started to see their leaves change colors too. Look at how these colors pop in Huntsville, Utah. This drone footage you're watching was filmed by Scott T. Taylor in the Snow Basin Ski Resort. Taylor wrote that these fall colors look like a bowl of candy corn. Check out this time lapse of a dense fog in New York City as it hovered over the Hudson River and on top of the George Washington Bridge this past Wednesday morning. Weather officials in the area warned of quick changes in visibility due to the fog and urged caution for morning commuters. This fog resembles the view that often takes place across the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Now back on Friday, September 29th, New York City was looking much different than what you just saw. Devastating flooding unfolded across New York and New Jersey after torrential rains hit the region. John F. Kennedy International Airport saw nearly 8 inches of rain that day. A state of emergency was put into effect and 23 million people were under a flood watch. CNN's Polo Sandoval has more from that day.
Chaos in New York City as heavy rain pounded the 5 boroughs and the surrounding areas, and more is yet to come. Brooklyn saw a month's worth, some 4.5 inches, in only 3 hours.
Wow, this is unbelievable. I had never seen this situation happen, and this is crazy. I don't know how they're going to get this water up.
Knee-deep water flooded streets.
Within, I guess, about 10 minutes, it was waist-high water,
forcing some residents to abandon their cars and others to create makeshift barriers to protect their homes and businesses. Flooded subway stations in Brooklyn with at least 10 lines suspended, and even buses taking on water while still in service.
Oh my goodness.
As they tried to wade through the floods, New York's airports weren't spared either, and LaGuardia's historic Marine Air Terminal flooded. In the Bronx, the National Weather Service warning that the Bronx River reached major flood stage with levels hovering close to 5 feet. Mayor Eric Adams declaring a state of emergency for the city.
It's been 1 year since Hurricane Ian lashed southwest Florida, blamed for more than 150 deaths in the U.S. and more than $112 billion in damage. Rebuilding after Florida's costliest hurricane has been slow and frustrating for many. CBS's Christian Benavides takes a look at the road to recovery in devastated Fort Myers Beach.
Mike Yost and his wife are living in this trailer in Bonita Springs. Temporary government-funded housing set up after Hurricane Ian.
Yes, we've made do to get by, but as far as moving and improving, it's a little harder than what you might think.
Yost lost his rental home on Fort Myers Beach and may not be able to afford to return.
The place I rented, it's probably going to be like $3,000 a month. Back then it was $1,500.
Piles of debris still line city streets, and most of the famed downtown area, known as Times Square, remains closed. While there is plenty of rebuilding taking place, some structures in Fort Myers Beach look like they're frozen in time from the moment they were destroyed.
It's heartbreaking. You know, this was supposed to be my forever home.
FEMA holds regular updates for residents like Diane Andrusco, who's been unable to return to her condo.
No electric, no sewer, no water, no power, no services to the building.
This is not lost on Mayor Dan Allers.
A lot of people invested their entire life savings to be here on the beach, and Ian took all of that away.
Allers says recovery could take several years, with insurance disputes, rebuilding costs, and rising interest rates slowing the process.
You hear construction everywhere that you go in Fort Myers Beach.
Yep.
What do you make of that?
That means that there's progress.
Some residents worry their Florida way of life is no longer possible. The mayor says while the city welcomes new, stronger buildings, it's working to keep the community vibe intact. Christian Benavides, CBS News, Fort Myers Beach, Florida.
We're still officially in the Atlantic hurricane season until November 30th, and an already active hurricane season could become even more eventful in its final stretch. The number of storms that tend to drop toward the end of October, with El Nino dominating and suppressing hurricane activity. But that might not be the case this year. More storms could possibly develop in the open ocean, where temperatures are unusually warm. Experts say they are in uncharted waters and are struggling to make a confident forecast for the rest of the season. The Atlantic season has had 18 named storms so far, which is already above average. And Tropical Storm Philippe brought rain as it brushed past the U.S. Virgin Islands this past Wednesday morning. This footage shows you what the waterfront in Charlotte Amelie on St. Thomas was looking like as that storm churned through the ocean. Philippe continued moving north last week, bringing heavy rain to Puerto Rico and again the Virgin Islands as it moved toward Bermuda. And this weekend, it brought tropical storm impacts to the northeastern United States, including heavy rain and strong wind gusts. Weather Extra will be right back. Stick with us. Welcome back to Weather Extra. Normally right now residents of Louisiana will be worrying about hurricanes and flooding. Instead, they're hoping for as much fresh water as they can get. CNN's Bill Weir reports on what is quickly becoming a saltwater crisis in the bayou.
In South Louisiana, folks are plenty familiar with saltwater that moves at the speed of a hurricane. But now they must also worry about saltwater that creeps, steady and invisible, toward the crops, machines, and drinking water systems of almost 1 million people.
I happen to be one who believes in the power of prayer. I'm going to ask for people to pray for rain.
After a second straight year of extraordinary drought, the not-so-mighty Mississippi is too weak to hold back the Gulf of Mexico. So the heavier saltwater is running downhill towards New Orleans in the shape of a wedge, with the toe about 15 miles in front of the kind of inundation that could threaten the health of the vulnerable and destroy everything from lead pipes to appliances. So the Army Corps of Engineers is urgently racing against time and salt with a couple different tools. This is the first of what will be many barges that can bring about 500,000 gallons of fresh water at a time. Downstream, they use it to dilute the brackish stuff as it goes into a small water plant here in Plaquemine Parish. The Corps says they can move 36 million gallons a day, but even that wouldn't be enough to save the New Orleans water supply. So they're already talking about maybe building pipelines to prop up that water system. In the meantime, the Corps is also building a big sill, like an underwater speed bump, to try to slow the wedge as it moves inland. But these are all temporary fixes. And the leader of this parish says if this is the new normal, that means parts of Louisiana will need the same kind of desalination that they use in Israel and other desert communities.
You've got one trailer would be the reverse osmosis, and the other would be the filtration system right there.
Keith Hinckley is the president of Plaquemine Parish, a spread out county of less than 25,000, now spending a fortune on desalination.
If we didn't have help from the state and the federal government, it could bankrupt the parish here.
So, right?
Yeah. Because we're probably right now about $33 million in on this situation.
No
and
kidding.
like I said, we're a small parish.
Just this summer, just this wedge.
Yeah, just because of this wedge.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is land that's familiar with hurricanes and flooding, not droughts and wildfires.
Right.
How do you reconcile these
Well,
things?
because like you say, when you look this way and you look that way, you're looking at water. We're in the middle of water, but we're in the middle of the wrong kind of water, and that's why we're needing these kind of machines.
There is hope El Nino will bring rare October rain, but this battle could last months, with the latest forecast putting the wedge close to New Orleans in the next 3 weeks.
But it's happened 2 years in a row because this is considered to be a pattern.
Lieutenant General Russell Honore led the military recovery efforts after Hurricane Katrina and says that was the first disaster that made him consider the costs of climate change. Now retired, it is the focus of his work as an environmental activist in his native Louisiana.
For the first time in my life, a couple of weeks ago, the governor declared a wildfire emergency. I've never heard that in Louisiana before. This time of the year, we normally go to church on Sunday, the priests are praying for no hurricanes. We need to turn that and ask them to start praying for thunderstorms.
Coming up after the break, Brady Taylor had the chance to talk with the meteorologist from Louisiana to learn more on why this saltwater intrusion is happening. That interview when we return.
Welcome into this week's Degrees of Science. The Mississippi River is down near historic lows, and that's caused problems for many locations. But one new problem that's caught national attention is the impacts this has on the potential of drinking water in New Orleans. So we brought in an expert and a New Orleans native, Steve Caparata from WAFB, our sister station in Baton Rouge. So Steve, to start out, for people that haven't seen firsthand what the Mississippi River is like, how bad of shape is that river in right now?
Yeah, it's awfully low, and it's pretty crazy because the story over the last decade or so is we've had high water event after high water event. So we've really been focused on flooding a lot in the last decade, and all of a sudden we get the other extreme this year where it's running too low. And so now we have this issue with the saltwater intrusion coming in from the Gulf of Mexico and up the Mississippi. It's a very slow process, but one that's now, it's been unfolding over the last couple or few weeks, and it looks like this is going to be an issue for a while.
So the saltwater intrusion, some people on the news may have seen it as that salt wedge that's moving in. Explain to folks, you know, what that is. Where you got the Mississippi coming right into the Gulf of Mexico over there, but is that something that typically happens, or is this mainly just due to the drought going on?
Yeah, it certainly has happened before. In fact, one of the things we might get into is the Corps of Engineers has built this, what they call an underwater sill, basically on the river bottom. Think of it as almost an underwater levee to try and prevent that saltwater wedge from getting farther upriver. They had done it last summer because it's been running a little bit dry. They've done it before, but this one is progressing much farther upriver. So what normally happens is, when we've got, the Mississippi carries a huge volume of water down to the Gulf of Mexico. And so typically, the vast majority of the time, there's so much momentum with that water that is southward bound toward the Gulf of Mexico that really prevents this saltwater wedge from moving upriver towards New Orleans and other communities. But because we're in this drought that's impacting so much of the central and eastern part of the country that drains into the Mississippi, we just have a very low volume of water coming down the Mississippi. There's not much momentum right now. And so that saltwater wedge is now moving upriver, and we just don't have that water to push it back out to the Gulf.
So is this already causing problems in the New Orleans water area, or what kind of bad problems are they expecting if it continues to move north? Yeah,
so New Orleans is doing just fine right now. So far, this has been largely an issue for smaller communities downriver of New Orleans. If your viewers may not be familiar, in Louisiana we have parishes instead of counties. So downriver from New Orleans and Orleans Parish, where New Orleans is Plaquemines Parish. Mostly some smaller communities. They've already been dealing with this for a couple of weeks, but the difference there is because the population level is so small and because the amount of water, fresh water they need to produce is much smaller, it's a little bit easier to tackle that problem. But as we face this potential of this saltwater wedge moving all the way up to New Orleans, which looks like it's still 3 to 4 weeks out. But as we face that potential, now you're talking about obviously a much larger population center, a much larger volume of fresh water that is needed and processed from the Mississippi. And so if you've got salt water coming into those freshwater intakes, that creates a whole host of problems.
So as a meteorologist, would you ever thought back in June as you're heading into hurricane season that towards the end of September, you'd be talking about lack of rain causing issues and not a hurricane moving in?
Yeah, it really is kind of crazy. And as I mentioned to you too, when you consider so much of our focus with the Mississippi River in recent years has been, but it felt like we were in this new normal of every year being a high water event, the Mississippi running very high, which triggers its own set of issues. You know, the Mississippi is leveed, obviously, right? So bigger cities like New Orleans, like Baton Rouge, where I am, are protected even when it gets very high. And then we've got these spillways and floodways that can be used and open when it gets exceptionally high, which we've had to deal with a few times over the last decade or so. So to all of a sudden hit this extreme contrast that on the opposite end of the spectrum, where we're dealing with it running so low, no doubt it's kind of a surprise, a shock. And just in general, you know, it's not something we're really used to. Water shortage in this part of the world is not something we're used to. You know, from New Orleans to Baton Rouge, South Louisiana, most spots average 60 inches or more of rainfall in a given year with very wet climate.
Welcome back to Weather Extra. Earth may not be within its safe operating space for humanity much longer, and here's why. Analysis from 29 scientists in 8 countries is warning human actions have pushed the world into the danger zone in 6 of 9 categories. Those categories were designed to gauge survivability for people. They include things like climate change, biodiversity, and freshwater use. The good news is thresholds were purposely set conservatively, so when we surpass them, there's still time to course correct. That happened in the 1990s. After scientists sounded alarm bells on the ozone layer. The world responded by phasing out ozone depleting chemicals, and it's now on track to recover completely. And European climate scientists have released their latest monthly snapshot of the planet's condition. Global temperatures have skyrocketed this year, putting the world on track to make history. CNN meteorologist Chad Myers has more.
Right. June, July, and August all were the hottest June, July, and Augusts on record. So that means the warmest summer ever since we've been keeping track. So that's the entire globe, not just one spot. There were warm spots, there were cool spots. But September did something remarkable, and not in a good way. September was 1.75 degrees Celsius, 3.15 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than a pre-industrial September on record. So that's how far now we are above where we should be when it comes to pre-industrial levels. June, July, and August, now in September, all breaking records, has put 2023 so far above the old record that we're likely not going to get down below the old record, and 2023 will eventually become the warmest year on record. I know there are still more months to come, but there's not much that's really going to change this. The last 4 months, now all the warmest on record, and there's September, and it doesn't look like it's very warm, but all of these are July and August. This September of 2023 is in the top 20 months of all time, not just top 20 Septembers, because it's number 1 in September, but the top 20 months of all time since we've been keeping track.
We now know the hotter temperatures are driving up energy expenses, but there's another rising cost: healthcare. A study by Virginia Commonwealth University and the Center for American Progress found soaring temperatures will be responsible for an additional 235,000 emergency room visits, as well as 56,000 hospital admissions each year. That's about $1 billion in additional healthcare cost. The Centers for Disease Control says an average of 700 people die from heat exposure each year, and the National Weather Service says among weather-related fatalities, heat is the #1 killer, more than extreme cold, hurricane winds, tornadoes, and floods. And before we go, the United States has already seen more billion-dollar weather and climate disasters in 2023 than ever before. So far this year, the U.S. has been hit with 23 disasters that each cost at least $1 billion. That's according to the new data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The previous annual record was 22 events in 2020. NOAA data shows this year's disasters have caused nearly $58 billion in damage, with 3 months left to go. And NOAA is still analyzing Hurricane Idalia and whether other events, including drought in the South and Midwest and Tropical Storm Hillary, which hit Southern California this summer, may have surpassed the $1 billion mark. America's costliest disaster year on record was 2017, coming in at $383 billion. Well, that's all we have for you on this week's episode of Weather Extra. Hopefully you're able to enjoy the beautiful fall weather we've had over the weekend. We get warmer over the upcoming work week. Well, that's all we have for you on this week's episode of Weather Extra. Have a great week. Goodbye.